Hello and welcome back to the opposition preview here on the Last Word on Spurs. Thanks so much for checking us out. Of course, a new feature that we're running this season, and of course, getting I would say getting the what's the right word? I would say getting the view of our opposition fans over the course of the season in terms of how Spurs are going to be lining up against them. Scott, lovely to have you join us. Thank you so much for your time. How are you, Scott? Well, you well first?
Yeah, I'm not bad, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not bad at all, thank you. Like I say, it's a bit of an early preview for us, of course, at the moment. We're recording here on the Wednesday with a game on the Saturday. So I think at the moment, team news, we might be slightly light on the ground, but we'll come on to that shortly. But overall, Scott, I know we've had a managerial change in there as well. Thoughts on Brighton's overall start to the season?
Yeah, I don't think you can complain, really, can you? We sit fourth in the league, so if the season finished now, we're off on the European tour, which everyone will be absolutely thrilled about. It just depends if we can maintain that position, really, because we started last season very similar. You know, we were flying at the start, and then from the start of October until Boxing Day, we didn't win a game. So it's just about avoiding that sort of fate and seeing if we can push on. But anything above a ninth place finish is good for us because that's an improvement on last season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the way Brighton style of play is, and there's many Spurs fans that simply adore the way they watch Brighton play. And even with the new manager, the way you went up to Liverpool and played ever so well, really unlucky not to come away with all the 3 points. It's a real, I would say, lovely to watch on the eye style of football. But we have to get your thoughts, of course, Scott, if we can, on that managerial change. Obviously, pretty much unexpected, I would imagine, for you as a supporter. Well, there might have been an idea that Potter would maybe move on at some point. Were you surprised by the timing of Potter going to Chelsea, or was you always expecting a move from one of the top 4, top 6 eventually for him?
I think he was always going to go because he was, too good a manager to be at Brighton. But like you say, the time was quite surprising because as recently as April, we'd lost 6 games in a row. We hadn't scored a home goal for 3 months. And you think, would Chelsea have taken Graham Potter at that point in time? Absolutely not. But since we went to Arsenal, we won at Arsenal, and obviously we came to Spurs and won at you guys the week later. Since then, we only lost 2 games in the Premier League, I think. So Potter deserves a chance to step up, but you could argue that Chelsea have appointed him based on 13, 14 games of form and not looked at the bigger picture of what had happened at Brighton before that. And that's a hell of a risk if you're sticking someone on a 5-year, £60 million contract. But good luck to him. He's going to be very, very rich at the end of it, no matter what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure, like I say, it's given you so many wonderful memories over the last year, over his reign at the club. I'm sure you'll wish him all but the best. Talk us through the new appointment, what you make of him, Scott, so far. I know it's early doors. He's only had the 1 game in charge, but definitely free-flowing attacking, some nice football, lots of goals in there. Overall, your thoughts on the new manager's appointment?
Well, he came in and he basically said in his first press conference, I like my teams to be bold, I like them to be brave, I want them to attack. And everyone thought, yeah, that's great, because the one criticism you could have of Potter was that at times it was a little bit pedestrian. We'd keep the ball possession for possession's sake, and hence why we went 3 months without scoring a home goal. I mean, that's clearly not going to happen under this bloke because he's literally all out attack. And no one would have thought we'd go to Liverpool in his first game and, we could have been 4-0 up in 15 minutes. It was absolutely incredible. Whether it's sustainable over an entire season remains to be seen. But if it can work at Anfield, why can't it work anywhere else? It's once concerned, it's not going to be dull.
No, and I think he comes as a manager a real good reputation. Obviously, Italian coach, plays football the right way. I mean, I say his adventure in Ukraine only came to an end, of course, because of the scenes and obviously the nature over there at the moment. So comes with a really high reputation. I think the players in that squad I see from the outside, Scott, are going to really enjoy playing for him because, like you've kind of explained there is a real boldness about the way Brighton like to move the ball across the pitch. There's a real fluidity about their play. I just wonder, like I say, I mean, based on the fact that you're sitting in 4th at the moment, what are the fans' expectations for the season, Scott?
It's hard to know, really, because I think there was at the start of the season, there was some statistic busted out that hardly any teams that have finished in the top 10 when it's their first time in the top 10 have ever improved. Most get dragged into a relegation battle, sort of version of second season syndrome. Like you talk with Sheffield United, you've seen it with Leeds. It's happened to Southampton. It's happened to Burnley, teams like that. And there was that worry that, maybe that would happen to us. The players wouldn't be able to repeat the heights of last season and we'd struggle. But if anything, we seem to be going better. And in a funny way, I think that the managerial change introduces a little bit of freshness. It means things don't go stale. and he looks perfectly suited to the squad of players he's got, because defensively, that was always Potter's strong point. We wouldn't concede many goals. So the bedrock's there to now go and play this attacking football. And if it releases the handbrake on someone like Trossard, first game under the new manager goes and gets a hat-trick, that's perfect for us until, obviously, Chelsea come and bid 70 million for Trossard in January or something.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Again, like I say, there's some real good players in that Brighton side that you are surprised. I mean, obviously, Spurs took Bissouma in the summer. I think it's fair to say we are yet to really see what he's about. I mean, I think we saw last season and the season before that he was so influential against the top 4, top 6 clubs that when Spurs signed him, it looked like a real queue just for that fee of just under 25 million. So far, hasn't really had a look in under Conte. I just wonder from your perspective, Scott, I mean, watching Bissouma up front, close and personal, as you had done over the last 2.5, even longer than that in terms of years, are you surprised that he hasn't just came in straight away to that Spurs side and almost Conte is bedding him in slowly but surely?
A little bit, but at the same time, when he arrived with us, it took him 18 months to become a first-team regular with us. He was, it took Potter coming in and then 6 months of working under Potter for him to really, master the Premier League, master that defensive midfield role where he's so effective. So it might be the same at Spurs, and I guess the difference is at Brighton, you get that time, you're afforded that time because there's not as much pressure. He's walking into a side that want to be challenging for the top 4, maybe even want to challenge for the title. You don't necessarily have that opportunity to learn. And I also think that, it's quite difficult, I think, going and playing for Conte because he's got such high demands and, every day he's got a certain specific role. And it will take Bissouma time to adapt to that sort of, more intense than he would have been used to under Graham Potter. But give him time and I think he'll get there. Is he going to get the time? That's the key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is obviously the key. He comes to Spurs, of course, on a 5 to 6 year contract. So you'd imagine with regards to Bissouma, he'll be around for a while. I'm sure he will get his break eventually in the team. What I'm really intrigued to know from your perspective, Scott, looking from the outside, is what you think make of Tottenham as a club, because I think it's fair to say Spurs have chopped and changed their philosophy over the last course of 3 or 4 years. They've had a number of different managers, of course, ranging from Pochettino. Then, of course, he went to Jose Mourinho. Then from Jose Mourinho, we had Ryan Mason in for a period, and we then turned to Nuno Espirito Santo. We currently have Antonio Conte. And the one constant thing with Spurs fans is about the style of play, which at Brighton, there doesn't ever seem to be that issue because you do play some really, really nice stuff. So looking in from the outside, Scott, what do you make so far of Spurs' season under Antonio Conte?
Well, I really like Conte. I think he's brilliant for no other reason than it's just fireworks off the pitch, isn't it? He's always jumping around, causing chaos in the technical area. And I think it'll be, because, aren't you guys exactly the same? I think it'll be very interesting to see them two potentially butting heads at the Amex on Saturday. But yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's just that word Spursy, isn't it? You guys seem to look like you've got it cracked, like when you were, chasing Leicester for a title and one glorious opportunity to win the league, and, it all goes a bit tits up. But I think you just need to settle on a philosophy, don't you? Because that's what Brighton have done. And you see it when Houghton went, we basically said, right, we want to play a different way. We're going to go and get a manager who does that. The whole club was reorganised based on that style, which made it quite a seamless transition, because there's not many Premier League clubs who would lose a manager as good as Graham Potter, but then somehow go out and find a guy just as good who's the perfect fit. And that's because it's all about succession planning. Tony Bloom's got his famous list of managers who will replace the current manager even before the current manager's gone. So he knows exactly who he wants, who he's going to get, and that's why it's so seamless. But it's not just Spurs, I think, because you see Man United talk about this long-term project and philosophy, and then they just blunder from one manager to the other. I think it's difficult to do at the top because there's pressure on. Fans want Champions League, they want trophies. The money's absolutely massive, so you don't get that sort of patience to build something. It's always looking for a quick fix, and I think that's what Spurs are going through at the minute, really. And they just, if you settle on a philosophy, it might take 4 or 5 years for it to bear fruit, but you've got to have that patience.
I'm intrigued to know from you, Scott. Like I say, from your perspective, you've seen a real good brand of football at Brighton since Potter was appointed at the club. How long would you say it took to actually see that in full flow, would you say, Scott? When was it at its peak for you? When did you actually feel like, now, do you know what, we've got a real identity, I can see what we're trying to do? How long do you think that took for you as fans to understand and see that on a continual basis?
Well, that's the most interesting thing about it, because you could see almost from day one what he was trying to do. You know, the way he wanted to play, passing football in possession, nice little triangles. But it wasn't until April when it actually started bearing results. So that is a good nearly 3 seasons before we actually saw, you know, when it all just suddenly clicked. This is what we were going to do. I mean, in Potter's second season, we didn't win a home game. We'd had I think it was a 14-game run without a victory at home. Any other manager gets sacked for that.
Oh.
Last season, we had our 3 months without a win. Any other manager gets sacked for that. We lost 6 in a row. Any other manager gets sacked for that. And that's where Brighton's so different to any other club, because Tony Bloom will look at the bigger picture. He'll think, okay, you know, these results are absolutely ghastly. But at the same time, you can see where the project's going, and he doesn't panic. And, you know, that bore its rewards because, like I said earlier, since April, we've been absolutely awesome. And we've basically pocketed, I think we've got £21 million for Potter in compensation. And we're selling players for, you know, 50. Cucurella went for 60 million. Ben White's gone for 50 million. Bissouma would have been a 50 million player if he had more than a year left on his contract. It's just, it has taken time and has had to be a lot of patience, but, you know, we've got there eventually. But how many other clubs are going to offer that sort of opportunity to somebody?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I say that kind of question I asked you, Scott, is more for the Spurs fans that are going to be watching this, because, again, it almost brings home the point that you don't always see the philosophy straight away. It has to take time. And then, again, as you've said there, so poignantly, is that even when you do play an attractive style of football, it doesn't necessarily breed you always positive results. You've had gaps in the season where there's been, of course, losses in a row. You've had obviously moments where you've gone on winless runs and they've stuck by the manager. And I think, again, it almost just always shows that from the outside looking in, to many people be like, well, Brighton played this most expansive, wonderful range of football. But under Potter, it wasn't always great in terms of points, in terms of results, and therefore it does, like I say, illustrate just, again, that almost tricky challenge between making fans content with the style and about winning. And I think we've always said it's hard to marry the two when it comes to Tottenham fans. So just intrigued to get your thoughts ahead of the weekend's game. I know it's probably light on teams at the moment, Scott, as we're recording on the Wednesday night, but is there any real highlight on teams that you want to bring to us that we should be aware of ahead of the weekend at the moment?
Just that I can't see how he will change anything that we did at Liverpool, basically. I mean, we went to Anfield, we scored 3 times. We should have scored 4 or 5, to be honest. And I don't think, I mean, how do you go and change after that? I mean, I think the other thing to note is if we were that attacking at Anfield, God knows what it's going to be like at the Amex, because it's his first game in charge at home. It's, you know, a buoyant crowd. It could be carnage. And I mean, the way Spurs defend at the minute, we could score 5 or 6, but then likewise, Harry Kane always seems to deliver against us. So it could, you know, feasibly, it could be 6-all for all I know.
Yeah, it's honestly one of those games. I mean, last season, Spurs, of course, winning at Brighton at a point in the season where Spurs really had to win to keep alive their hopes of a top 4 finish. Like you said there, Scott, it is 3rd versus 4th. I bet you wouldn't believe I'd be saying that to you probably this time from last year. But I mean, ultimately, overall, Scott, what are you going to go for at the weekend result-wise? What do you think is a reasonable scoreline for you guys?
Again, it's hard to know because our home form until the last sort of, well, since April was absolutely terrible under Potter. So will it be the same under this guy? Will it be different? I'll probably sit on the fence actually and go for a draw. I think we do a draw. We had a Brighton Spurs draw for a while now, so an entertaining 2-all.
Okay, nice. And I think always Spurs fans fear that new manager bounce, Scott, and here we are again. It's going to be the manager's first game at home. I'm sure he's going to get a really, really big welcome from the Brighton fans, right? Yeah,
well, those of us who can get there, because obviously the train strike's a bit of a nightmare when you play at a stadium which you can only get to and from on the train. So we'll see.
Out of interest, Scott, I have to ask you, that's that final question on the rail strikes. Any concern by the attendance for you? Do you think it will be a lot more less than what you would normally expect at the Amex? What do you think there, just on that point? It's a really good point you made there.
Yeah, I think it will be less because, you know, the only way you can get to our stadium is via the train reasonably. The club are doing their best. They're putting on, you know, an absolute ton of buses. There's park and ride stuff. But, you know, for a 5:30 kickoff, if the game finishes at 7:30, there's a chance that if things don't go to plan, people could be stranded at the Amex till, you know, 9 o'clock or whatever afterwards. So it's not ideal, but it's one of those problems that we have as, you know, we've got a great stadium. It's fantastic, but you are sort of beholden to the public transport issues. So it'll be interesting to see what the crowd is. I think people will make an effort because it's the new guy's first game. It's not like we're in the middle of one of those 14-game winless streaks, in which case it might be a case of sod it, let's stay in and watch Strictly or something. But let's see.
Honestly, Scott, been a real pleasure been a real pleasure having you on Last Word on Spurs. Where can everybody find the content you provide out there for the Brighton fans? Where can they find you?
So our Twitter page is @WeAreBrighton, and we have a website which is wearebrighton.com.
Amazing. Scott, thank you so much for your time. Like I say, inadvertently, we actually gone live on this show. It was meant to be a private preview, but such is the nature of Last Word on Spurs, they always find a way of upsetting the audience and going live. So, guys, there's about 40, 50 odd of you watching us live. Thank you so much for all the comments. Really appreciate it. We are back with you for live post-match reaction to Brighton on Saturday evening. Or at least we say is Scott, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you so much.